skeletons speak with such a screech. You'll shake and shudder in surprise when you hear these zombies shriek. Spooky, scary skeletons and shivers down your spine. A shrieking skull will shock your soul and seal your doom tonight. Spooky, scary skeletons.
Hey vamps and dark creatures, today I'm going to be reading you a bit of the first chapter of my first book, The Dark World. Yeah, this is the first book I've ever written. I wrote it when I was 16 and I want to read it for you guys, so here we go. You guys voted for me doing this in my regular voice and not ASMR. So if you want me to do it in ASMR, let me know in the comments because I will absolutely do this in ASMR. Okay, so chapter 1, if you can see it, no, you can only see white. Fix it, Satan. Okay, chapter 1 is called The First Death. The full moon shone in a bright circle of silver, spreading a dim light throughout the night. On the ground below, hushed footsteps hurried along the forest floor, crushing dried leaves and twigs beneath their weight. Both men, draped in dark cloaks, walked along without speaking a word. Only the sound of broken twigs disturbed the steady silence that passed between them. The taller man spotted it first. Wispy gray smoke drifted lazily into the dark air from a stone chimney attached to a shabby cabin. One removed his hood, his narrowed eyes upon the old wood ahead of them, his long black hair and equally black traveling cloak trailing on a slight breeze. He's sexy. "This is it?" he asked the other, whose hood still rested low over his face, casting it in deep shadow. The second man stood silently, his gaze on the cabin, deep thought tilting his chin upward, for the smell of lichen was thick on the air. There was no denying it. The scent filled his nose freely. "Are we going to speak to her or not, brother?" the other said. "I don't see the reason for coming all this way just to stare at a diseased cabin." He angry. How could he not smell it? The second man wondered, seeing the vampire's black eyes glisten with hunger. Hunger, he knew, begets impatience. "Christian," he said smoothly, releasing his hood from his face as to better suit the vampire's hunger. Yes, the eyes were shifting slightly, a red hue beginning to cover the black. "There are matters that must be taken into account before one can go barging into a run-down cabin." "Like what?" Christian said dryly, checking the wind for specks of lichen stench. Ah, good. His senses weren't all devoid of danger. "Something of the sort," he said quietly, and after a short pause, "Have you fed for the night?" His red eyes appeared to shine with sudden intrigue. "I haven't," he admitted, staring upon the second man suspiciously then. "Why do you ask?" The thick scent of lichen filled his nose with greater presence now, and as he stared at his brother through the gloom, he wondered how on earth the vampire could not smell it. "No matter," he said. "I just think it foolish for you to accompany me when you have not fed. It would be most bothersome for you, I imagine, if you ran into misfortune or some other matter and you were ill-equipped to deal with it." "Xavier," he said sternly, and his stare was full of incredulity. Why do I... these words? God, why did I do this to myself? "If you think me to wander off for my fix of blood and miss whatever Dracula has sent us here for, I shall inform you of whatever you believe you may have missed." I remember that line. Hey! Hey! He said, his voice deadly serious. "It is my duty." His eyes seemed to lessen in their shine, although they remained quite hidden from light. In the dark protection of trees, whose trunks twisted darkly and whose branches hung low, brandishing black leaves. Xavier hoped the vampire would take the hint and leave, for something was very strange here, and he would not see his only brother harmed because of it. "Very well, Xavier," Christian said at last, and Xavier could not help but feel the vampire was most relieved to tend to his nourishment. "Thank you." He turned, stepping swiftly through the trees, his back quickly lost in the overwhelming darkness of the woods. Xavier's mind not able to venture far from the guilt the younger vampire must have been feeling, for it had been Christian's doing, after all, that they were the creatures they were. He smelled her. The rich scent of freshly drawn blood reached his nose in the cold air, the ever-lingering scent of putrid beast. He turns just in time to see the door swing open, and there she stood, a hand wrapped around the old handle, a strange dark blue cloak over her shoulders. She stared through the night, and her brown eyes found him, the smile slow to grace her lips. Disclaimer. Me and my editor fought. So, there's typos, there's punctuation missing. It's not my fault. I tried. I really did try. Okay. Alone, she whispered, her voice reaching his ears quite easily as he stepped into the clearing. Her beauty, her hunger. Yes, she was quite the formidable vampire, Eleanor Black. That's my girl, Eleanor. Okay. Xavier understood immediately why Dracula had sent them to her. I believe so, he said softly, stepping forward into the cabin as she turned and walked toward two tattered armchairs that faced the small fireplace, the fire burning low within its grate. He watched as she took a seat in one farthest from the door and closed her eyes. She waved a hand, allowing the door to close behind him. But how curious it was. The smell of the cold night air dispersed as she did this, but the hard stench of lichen did not. There's a lichen in the house. Xavier. Christian wished to feed, she whispered, bringing his mind back to the here and now. He gazed upon her, seeing her closed eyes, her long, wavy black hair resting against her shoulders and chest as her head remained back against the chair. Exhaustion radiated off every pore. What on earth had she been doing to cause such utter depletion? Did she not acquire blood? Yes, he said after a time of staring, knowing full well she could have heard their entire conversation if she so chose. It's for the best. He would not take kindly to the news I have prepared. And that would be? She opened her eyes, and yes, even against the small light of the fire, her weakness could not be denied. She was starving. Like I am. What we need to fight these beasts that threaten our quiet existence with the human world, she answered. He stepped forward, stopping just beside the vacant armchair, mind wrapped with just what that could be, when she said, Forgive me. I haven't fed all night. I am feeling a bit out of sorts. A lichen. Did you fight one, Eleanor? He asked. Surely a lichen had remained here. The smell was quite overpowering now. She stared at him, the disbelief within her eyes apparent as she sat up in the old chair. No, she breathed. No, I didn't. I haven't fed, that's all. Xavier's mind rang with her words before he decided that she had to be telling the truth. Eleanor Black never lied. Very well, he said. He moved to sit in the free armchair beside her, pulling back the sleeves of his cloak and white shirt, the pale of his skin illuminated further by the orange light of the low fire. He rested it over the chair for her to see. Take my blood. Now, friends, that is a no-no. You do not take another vampire's blood. You just don't do it. You don't do it. You don't do it. You don't do it. Okay. A shaky hand flew to her mouth and she stared at his arm, the veins quite clear under the skin, and said, You know I can't. I can't. Not anymore. Which means these freaky-deaky-deeks been doing this more than once. But she could not look away. He stared at her, taking in her eyes, the tremble of her hand. Even famished, she still held her beauty. But of course she would. All that had changed was their title. Yet how drastic a change it proved to be. They was together, and now they ain't. Turning his mind from disturbing thoughts, he raised his arm off the chair. Please, he said, and raised his wrist slightly. For no matter their standing now, he would not allow her a permanent death. And the hand was lowered from her lips as the stark desire to taste him overwhelmed her. Her eyes had slowly begun to change their color, going from a soothingly cold brown to a most mesmerized red. Are you sure? She whispered, her voice thick with hunger. By all means, he answered, having no time at all to realize it before her hand had reached forth, settling his wrist before her lips. She opened her mouth, the fangs there gleaming in the light of the fire as shadows danced across her pale face. Before he could say another word, she had bit down across a vein. She trying to kill him. The blood leaving him in earnest. He fought back a wave of pleasure the more she drank, knowing he should not feel it, not the exact desire filling his dead heart, for they were over. There was nothing there at all. So why do I love this so? 'Cause you love her, stupid! He managed to watch her as she drank. She could know nothing of his pleasure, know nothing of his desire, for hers was being fulfilled. And to a vampire so lost in her bloodlust, that was all that mattered. She drank for moments more, and when the wind outside the old cabin made the wooden walls groan, she released his arm. His blood spilled down the sides of her mouth with her greed. She had taken far too much indeed, but he had been far too preoccupied to care. He stared at her closely now, rubbing a hand over his closing wound, noticing the way she would not meet his eyes. Of course, he thought simply, racked with guilt. She always was one for rules. Eleanor, he said, watching as she blinked, her eyes returning to the regular state, and the smile was slow to grow upon her face, but there it was. Yes, she whispered absently. What news have you for me? That's all y'all getting today! Okay. So that was like 5-6 pages from my first book, The Dark World. You have to read more to see what else happens. Okay, I'm gonna stop being annoying. Have to read more to see what happens, and I'm so proud. Okay, yeah, I wrote this when I was 16. I like to think I've gotten better as a writer. You let me know. Tell me if this is trash. Tell me if you don't like it. Don't tell me there's typos and punctuation missing. I know. Trust me. I don't need to hear it from you. I don't need to hear it. Okay. Whatever. Okay. So, yes, this is my baby. I wrote this when I was 16. I'm 27. I'm about to be 28. Can you? I've been writing this series for like 11, 12 years now. I wanted to end. I don't want to do it anymore. Please buy my books. I don't have to write this anymore. Please. So, enough chaoticness. Yeah, this was me reading the first 5 chapters of my first book in the Dark World series. It's called The Dark World for a reason. There are not only white characters in the series. Ignore all the covers that have all white characters. There are black characters. There's Spanish characters in here. It's an AU London, Alternate Universe London in here. There's a vampire city beneath London. There's a bunch of vampire cities all around the world. There's giants. There's dragons. There's centaurs. There's witches. There's fae, which are beautiful women who can tell the future. There's dwarves, there's goblins, there's orcs, there's a whole bunch of different creatures yep, there's a lot of them. So, yeah, this is not just a vampire, werewolf, Anne Rice type of book. I have never read Anne Rice. I don't plan on it. Don't be shocked. I love vampires, but I have never read her books. So I wrote my own. Yeah. So if you like it, please leave a comment on Amazon, Goodreads, this video, my Twitter, whatever, my Patreon. I don't care. Just tell me. Tell me you're reading it. Tell me if you like it. Tell me if you hate it. I don't care. Just let me know. Yeah. So it's what? It's 350 pages, my dude. 350. This, fun fact, this was supposed to be like 500 pages. This was originally like 130k words. I had to cut it down to 100k words. All of the books in my series, actually, I had to cut them all down to 100k. The second book was 190k. This is an epic fantasy. If I had my way, this book would be the size of 2 more of these books. Because I like big, long, epic fantasies. So when you read this, keep in mind this is not a slow burn vampire mystery, even though it reads that way. This book sets up the rest of the Dark World. It sets up everything. They start to go on their epic fantasy journey in number 2, The Immortal's Guide. If I had my way, all of the creatures would be on the cover. Everybody would be on there, but I don't have my way. So I love Alexandria. I love her. She's wonderful, and I love the woods, and I love this cover. But just know, this is not just about vampires and werewolves. I've had people be really confused when the fourth cover came out. When the fourth cover came out, they were really confused because this is a phoenix, and it's called the Phoenixes of the Nest because there are phoenixes in the book. There are phoenixes. There are other creatures. It's not just a vampire, werewolf, underworld, mismatched Game of Thrones type thing. And I'm not just pulling those names out of my butt. Like in the beginning, in the first page, there's praise for the Dark World, and people have called my book. They say Xavier, one of my main characters, could be the next Lestat. We have the Dark World is a great gothic fantasy. Game of Thrones, yeah. So, my books are falling. So, if you like Game of Thrones, vampires, gothic literature, I'm your girl. With blood and love, I'm Essie Paris. Bye!
Rebecca Ravinia on Twitter, thank you so much for the support. Love you.